About Marxism. Marxism is a product of Enlightenment thought in that it's based in secular thinking and Enlightenment precepts. Most specifically, it is a type of socialist humanism, and it shares much in common with socialism, but also deviates from socialism in other ways. Marxism was another response, just like socialism, was another response to liberal-dominated society and to laissez-faire capitalism. And also like socialism, Marxism held out hope for a better future for the working class. Marx wrote in tandem with a fellow German thinker by the name of Friedrich Engels. And Marx and Engels combined to write the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Both Marx and Engels' thoughts in the Communist Manifesto are based fundamentally off of a belief in the dialectical view of history. And Marxism believes that history is an inevitable process, and more specifically, that history will inevitably evolve towards human freedom and progress. Now, the way the dialectical view of history works is you have a thesis, an established order, and this established order produces an antithesis, an antithesis, and the thesis and the antithesis will clash, will conflict, and that will produce an entirely new synthesis. So let's look at this as applied to some real-world dynamics. Marx specifically applied the dialectical process of conflict between thesis and antithesis, producing a new synthesis, to class conflict. And Marx believed that history moved through the dialectical process of class conflict. So for instance, in the feudal era, you had the thesis, the established order of the feudal hereditary hierarchy, which produced an antithesis, the serfs of the lower class, and the conflict between the class conflict between the two produced the middle class. This was the synthesis. Now, the synthesis then becomes the new thesis, the new established order. The bourgeoisie owning the means of production in the industrial era, capitalist business owners, produce, therefore, the antithesis, the proletariat, as we enter into the industrial era. Marx believed that there would be inevitable class conflict between the bourgeois middle class and the proletariat, the urban working class, which would produce a synthesis. And Marx predicted this synthesis would result in a dictatorship of the proletariat. This is probably the area in which socialism and Marxism share the most in common. Now, Marxism had an outlook that this overthrow of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat would take place violently. Okay, socialism doesn't call necessarily for a violent overthrow, but beyond that, there are a number of commonalities as it pertains to the dictatorship of the proletariat and socialism. One is Marx's prediction that this dictatorship of the proletariat, which is the synthesis in the conflict between the class conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, will be the seizing of the means of production and the establishment of collective ownership. That's exactly what socialism calls for, is the establishment of collective ownership of factories, mines, machines, etc. And Marx believed that this would lead to the establishment of a classless society. This is a society in which everyone is part of the same social class, which can be connected with outlooks of socialism, and that this would be a just society. Marx equated equality with justice, just like the socialists saw a just society as a equal society, equally socially, equally economically as well. Now, Marx believed that this dictatorship of the proletariat would therefore be free of the class conflict that was the driver of history through the dialectical process. So once you no longer, now all you're left with is thesis. You have no more class conflict because everyone's going to be part of a classless society. So this is going to be the end of class conflict. This will also represent, therefore, the end of exploitation. The long exploitation going back, of course, millennia, going back to the early days, let's say, of Pharaoh enslaving people in Egypt. This era of the dictatorship of the proletariat will mark the end of exploitation, the long history of humans exploiting other human beings' labor for profit. Now, Marx and Engels now began to deviate even more from socialism. And specifically here we have the aspects that pertain to communism. Communism is a fundamentally different outlook and type of vision for human society. Now, Marx and Engels were influenced by Locke in that they believed if you put people in a better environment, you're going to have better human beings. So Marx and Engels believe that you're going to have a dictatorship of the proletariat in which exploitation will end. Marx and Engels envision this transforming human beings based on the Lockean notion of the tabula rasa. So what you're going to have are increasing values of cooperation and increasing concern and consideration for the welfare of the group. No longer will you have the self-interest and the individualism that has led people and allowed people to justify their exploitation of others for financial gain, according to Marx and Engels. Instead, what you're going to have is the fulfillment of human potential. And that's a human being that is concerned about the welfare of the group, that values cooperation. So the way society produces material goods, Marx and Engels view this as the determinant factor of the way people will think and act. So if people produce material goods collectively, under collective ownership, and establish social and economic equality, then you are going to have an environment which produces human beings that are fundamentally concerned about the welfare of the group and not about the welfare and emphasis on the individual. Now, this is the stage in which you have the further development of the articulation of communism, and this is fundamentally different from the socialist outlook. Marx and Engels are envisioning a final stage of history. This is a final stage of history based on this progress and evolution that Marx and Engels articulate of human beings becoming more group concerned as opposed to self-concerned. Marx and Engels believed that based on this new environment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, human beings would live so cooperatively without being forced to do so that you'd have the withering away of government and the state. So what communism is, it is basically human beings have become so advanced in their concern for the group that you no longer have the need for authority. And instead, it's a functional, communism is a functional anarchy in which human beings live together freely and equally, so concerned about the well-being of the group and their fellow group member before themselves that there's no need for the government any longer. Marx believed that the government would wither away. In addition, he believed that the government would wither away because he saw the government traditionally as a source of authority, as an oppressive and coercive force used to control and exploit the underclass. Now that human beings have developed, you enter a final stage of history in which you no longer need the oppressive and coercive state for the purposes of exploitation. The era of humans exploiting other human beings is gone, so you no longer have need for the government. Instead, you live in a peaceful, free, and equal liberty, way over here on this side of liberty, almost an anarchy, called communism. And Marx and Engels argued that this would be a much greater freedom for humanity than that provided by liberalism. Liberalism, they argue, gave human beings so much liberty mixed with so much individualism that many people in the society had the real possibility of the freedom to starve. Instead, the Marxist outlook speaks to a utopian, the utopian bent of secular humanism out of the Enlightenment. You can see some of these notions of perfectibility, and that human beings will become so cooperative that human beings will live according to this creed. From each according to his abilities, you apply your abilities to the betterment of the group. To each according to his needs. The group will look out for the needs of each individual as they work together collectively. Now, here's the appeal of Marxism. Now, Marxism was appealing not just to members of the working class, but also to some members of the middle class as well. Marx and Engels themselves were products of the middle class. They came from middle class families. Engels' father was, in fact, a capitalist business owner. Now, here are some of the appeals of Marxism. It articulates a heaven. Now, of course, this is communism. This is a heaven on earth. This is a state in which human beings are so cooperative they no longer need the government to coerce them to act in any certain way. Now, the irony of this is that in the establishment of communist governments in the 20th century, in real life situations, these governments were often very coercive and very oppressive, and forcing people to act the way they believe they should behave, such as in Soviet Russia. Now, that was done in the name of communism, but of course this did not represent a communist state as Marx and Engels had envisioned it in the middle of the 19th century. Remember, Marx and Engels are writing this in 1848. So it articulates a heaven on earth of cooperation where people are motivated by concern for the group and that everyone's needs are met. Marxism also answers all the big questions. You think about the big questions, and in this way, Marx appealed to people the same way a religion would appeal to people, in that it answers questions about what is the meaning of life. You've got this articulation of the progress, inevitable progress through the dialectical process towards human freedom and liberation and equality, a just, equal, and free society. Not only does it answer the meaning of life, it also speaks to how one should live in relation to others. You should be concerned about the welfare of the collective, of the group. And it also explains why suffering exists, which is another of the big questions. Marx says suffering is necessary, that the suffering of the proletariat, the urban working class, is a necessary evil along the inevitable road to the dictatorship of the proletariat and then on to a communist reality for human society. Additionally, Marxism speaks to a universe that has purpose and meaning and order. Human reality is evolutionary, and it runs according to set laws, according to the dialectical process of thesis in conflict with antithesis, producing a new synthesis towards a progress. Additionally, Marxism is optimistic. It says history is moving towards equality, justice, freedom, progress, etc. Finally, one other thing to understand about Marxism is that it's materialistic. It believes the physical world itself is the source of meaning and purpose for human existence. Marx famously said that religion, and Marxism is purely secular, Marx, famously said that religion had been used as the opium of the masses, promising the lower class the kingdom of heaven while exploiting people and using that promise to exploit the underclass on earth. Marx believed that religion was a ruse. He did not believe in an afterlife. He only believes in meaning as contained within the physical world. But he believed that the physical world has an order and a trajectory towards a utopian vision, what Marx believed would be an inevitable reality of a communist reality for humanity. And finally, Marxism appealed to women specifically as well. Marx and Engels both agreed that women were oppressed in their relationships with men. As Engels said, within the family, the husband is like the bourgeoisie, is the established order, the exploitive force within the institution of marriage, and the wife represents the proletariat, the exploited, the downtrodden. Now, Marx and Engels therefore believed women experienced a double oppression. Not only were they oppressed by in their relationships with men, but they were also oppressed by the ruling classes, the middle class, etc. So Marx and Engels, they articulated a long-term strategy for women that appealed to many women. And it said that women should obtain political equality. Marx and Engels believed that men and women should be equal politically, economically, socially, etc. Excuse me. Now, by attaining political equality, then they should use that political equality in the struggle for economic equality, for economic independence, which would grant them social equality. And they believe the establishment of equality. Remember, this is their definition of justice. That human beings could not achieve communism until you had the equality between the sexes, that this was a necessary precondition for full human emancipation under the state of communism. Thanks.